Velthar walked through the metal corridors of the human base and felt disappointed. Everything was too small. The doorways barely fit his 7-foot frame. The walls were thin metal instead of proper stone. Even the air smelled wrong. Too much oxygen and not enough sulfur. He had expected more from the species that claimed to be warriors. The Thexari Empire had heard stories about humans for 50 years now. Stories about their wars, their victories, their expansion across the stars. But looking around this place, Velthar could only see weakness. A human soldier walked past him. The creature was tiny, maybe 5.5 feet tall. Its skin was pale and soft-looking. No natural armor, no claws or fangs. Just small hands and a round face with strange hair growing from its head. How did such weak things survive, let alone fight wars? Velthar reached the briefing room and had to duck through the entrance. Inside, more humans sat around a table. They all looked up at him with those weird forward-facing eyes. Most alien species had eyes on the sides of their heads like proper prey animals. But humans had predator eyes even though they looked like prey in every other way. "You must be Velthar," said a human female sitting at the head of the table. She wore the markings of a captain. "I'm Captain G1. Welcome to Forward Base Delta." Velthar looked down at her. She was even smaller than the others, maybe 5 feet tall. Her black hair was tied back in a simple knot. She wore the same gray uniform as the rest, with no decorations except for rank pins. Everything about her seemed plain and ordinary. "Captain," Velthar said, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice, "I am here for Operation Blackout." "Good, take a seat." G1 pointed to a chair that had been made bigger for him. "We're waiting for a few more team members." As if summoned by her words, 3 more humans entered the room. The first was a large male with scars across his face and arms. His left arm looked wrong somehow, too shiny, too perfect. It took Velthar a moment to realize it was artificial. "Sergeant Doyun," the man said, nodding to Velthar. His voice was calm and steady. "Heard we're working together." The second human was much younger, a female with kind eyes and gentle movements. She carried a medical bag and smiled at everyone in the room. She looked like she had never seen battle in her life. "Private Minji," she said in a soft voice. "I'll be handling medical support." The third human made Velthar pause. He was average height and build, but something about his eyes was unsettling. They held a strange light, like he found everything amusing. He grinned at Velthar with too many teeth showing. "Corporal Hyunwoo," he said. "I blow things up." Velthar settled into his chair, which creaked under his weight. His forearms rested on the table as he studied each human. In a proper Thexari unit, warriors showed their strength through scars, through the thickness of their armor plates, through the sharpness of their natural weapons. These humans showed nothing. They looked soft and fragile and utterly unprepared for real war. Captain G1 activated a holographic display in the center of the table. 3 star systems appeared, each marked with red warning symbols. 3 days ago, we lost contact with 3 separate colonial worlds, she began. Harmony Station, Prosperity Deep, and Haven's Rest. All 3 went dark within 6 hours of each other. Velthar leaned forward. "Enemy attack?" "Unknown." No distress signals. No signs of weapons fire. No debris fields. They just stopped talking. The hologram zoomed in on each world. Harmony Station was a research facility. Prosperity Deep was a mining colony. Haven's Rest grew food for half the sector. All different purposes, all different locations, but all silent. "Each world has different defensive systems," Doyun said, his artificial arm making soft clicking sounds as he moved it. "Harmony has plasma shields. Prosperity has underground bunkers. Haven's Rest has early warning satellites. Whatever did this got past all of them without a fight." Velthar studied the tactical information. Perhaps they were hit by some new weapon, something that kills quickly and leaves no trace. Hyunwoo's grin got wider. Or maybe something that doesn't work like normal weapons. "What do you mean?" Velthar asked. "Humans have fought lots of different enemies," Minji said in her gentle voice. "Some of them don't follow the usual rules." Velthar looked at her in confusion. What did that mean? War had rules. Physics had rules. You fought with weapons and armor and tactics. What other rules could there be? Captain G1 continued the briefing. "Our mission is simple. We go to each world, find out what happened, and report back. If possible, we rescue any survivors. And if we encounter whatever did this," Velthar asked. "We deal with it," G1 said simply. Velthar noticed something strange then. When she said those words, all the other humans nodded. Not the careful nod of soldiers accepting orders, but the relaxed nod of people discussing something normal. Like she had said they would stop for lunch or check the weather. "You're not concerned?" Velthar asked. "3 worlds destroyed by an unknown enemy, and you seem almost eager to face it." Do-hyun shrugged. "We've seen worse. Worse than entire worlds going silent?" "Oh yes," Hyunwoo said, his eyes twinkling. "Much worse." Velthar felt a chill run through his chitinous shell. These humans talked about unknown threats like they were discussing breakfast. Either they were incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Given how weak they looked, he suspected the latter. The briefing continued for another hour. They would take a fast ship to Harmony Station first, then move to the other worlds based on what they found. Each human had specific gear suited for different types of threats. Do-hyun carried weapons that could adapt to various enemy types. Minji had medical supplies for species Velthar had never heard of. Hyunwoo had explosives designed for special circumstances. When asked what special circumstances meant, Hyunwoo just smiled and said, "You'll know them when you see them." As the meeting ended, Velthar noticed the humans chatting quietly among themselves. They talked about normal things: food, weather, messages from home. Minji showed pictures of her family. Do-hyun mentioned wanting to visit some planet after the mission. Hyunwoo told a joke that made the others laugh. They acted like they were going on a routine patrol instead of investigating the destruction of 3 worlds. Velthar found their attitude disturbing. In his culture, warriors prepared for battle with ceremony and focus. They meditated on death and glory. They sharpened their weapons and said prayers to the war gods. These humans packed their gear while humming cheerful songs. Later, as Velthar prepared his own equipment, he reflected on what he had seen. The humans seemed utterly unprepared for serious combat. They were small, soft, and acted casually about obvious danger. Their technology was adequate, but nothing special. Their weapons were standard energy rifles and chemical explosives. Yet somehow these weak creatures had built an empire that stretched across dozens of star systems. They had fought wars against species much stronger than themselves and won. The galaxy respected and feared human military power. Velthar could not understand it. Perhaps their reputation was built on luck rather than skill. Perhaps their enemies had been weaker than reported. Perhaps the stories about human warfare were exaggerated. He would find out soon enough. In 12 hours they would reach Harmony Station and face whatever had destroyed 3 worlds in a single day. As he checked his weapons one final time, Velthar felt confident about the mission ahead. His natural armor could stop most weapons. His forearms gave him advantages in combat. His senses were sharper than any human's. Whatever they found out there, he would be ready for it. The humans might be weak, but he was Thexari. He was a warrior born and bred for battle. He would protect these fragile allies and complete the mission. He had no idea that by the mission's end, he would learn what true fear looked like. The ship dropped out of hyperspace near Harmony Station, and Velthar immediately knew something was wrong. His sensitive hearing picked up vibrations that should not exist. His nose detected scents that made no sense. Even his natural armor felt uncomfortable, like it was trying to protect him from something that attacked in ways armor could not stop. "Readings are all over the place," said Captain Jiwon, studying her instruments. "Gravity is normal one moment, then spikes to 3 times normal, then drops to almost nothing." Velthar looked at the main screen. Harmony Station hung in space like always, but something about it hurt to look at. The edges seemed to blur and shift. Sometimes parts of the station appeared to be missing, then suddenly they were back. "Hull breach?" he asked. "No breaches detected," Do-hyun replied, his artificial arm clicking as he worked the controls. "Station is intact. All sections showing normal atmosphere and pressure." "Then what is wrong with it?" The humans exchanged glances. Minji spoke first, her voice still gentle but somehow different. "Sometimes things break in ways that don't show up on normal scans." Velthar did not understand what that meant, but he felt his armor plates tighten against his body. His warrior instincts, developed over decades of combat, screamed warnings. But warnings about what? There was no enemy visible, no weapons firing, no ships attacking, just a space station that looked wrong. Hyunwoo was grinning again, but now his expression seemed less like amusement and more like anticipation. "Should I prep the special gear?" "Not yet," Jiwon said. "Let's see what we're dealing with first." They docked with the station through the main airlock. Everything appeared normal during the docking procedure. The airlock sealed properly. Atmosphere readings were good. But when the inner door opened, Velthar's senses were assaulted by wrongness. The corridor ahead looked normal at first glance. Standard metal walls, proper lighting, clean air. But as Velthar stepped inside, he noticed details that made his skin crawl. The lighting fixtures cast shadows in the wrong directions. The air moved in patterns that defied the ventilation system. His footsteps echoed before he took them. Station log shows normal operations until 3 days ago, Minji said, checking a wall panel. Then everything just stops. No final entries, no emergency records, like someone turned off a switch. They moved deeper into the station. Velthar's forearms kept reaching for weapons, but he forced himself to stay calm. The humans walked casually, but he noticed they were watching everything with sharp attention. Their relaxed attitude was an act. They found the first survivor in the medical bay, a human female sitting on an examination table, staring at nothing. She breathed normally and her heart beat steadily, but she did not respond when they spoke to her. Minji approached carefully. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The woman turned her head slowly. When she looked at Minji, Velthar saw that her eyes were wrong. Not injured or diseased, but wrong in a way he could not explain. They held no recognition, no awareness, just empty presence. The whispers came from below, the woman said in a flat voice. They spoke in mathematics that made the walls forget how to be solid. Velthar felt his armor plates shift uncomfortably. "What does that mean?" "We broke through into the deep place," the woman continued, still staring at Minji but not seeing her. "The place where rules don't work, where cause and effect dance backward, where death and life are just suggestions." Minji took out a medical scanner and ran it over the woman. The device beeped in confusion, showing readings that contradicted each other. Temperature normal and freezing and burning hot all at the same time. Heart rate steady and stopped and racing beyond possibility. "Her body is fine," Minji said quietly, but something happened to her mind. Something that broke the way she processes reality. They found more survivors scattered through the station, all of them alive and healthy but wrong in the same way. They spoke about things that made no sense. About researchers who had dug too deep into space itself. About finding something that should not exist. About whispers that taught them the true nature of mathematics. In the research section, they found the source of the problem. A laboratory where the walls bent inward in directions that hurt to look at. Equipment that existed and did not exist at the same time. A hole in the floor that led down into darkness but also led up and sideways and into yesterday. What were they researching here? Velthar asked. Captain Jiwan read from a computer terminal that flickered between different realities. Dimensional physics. They were trying to understand the space between spaces, the area where our universe touches other universes. And they found something? Something found them, Do-Hyun said grimly. As if summoned by his words, the wrongness in the room got stronger. The lights began casting shadows that moved independently. The air started flowing in circles that defied physics. And from the hole in the floor came a sound that was not quite sound, more like reality itself whimpering. Velthar's warrior training kicked in. He drew his plasma rifle and aimed at the hole. Hostile contact. Wait, Jiwan said, holding up a hand. Don't shoot. Why not? Because you might hit it. Velthar stared at her. That is the point of shooting. Not with this kind of enemy, Hyunwoo said, his grin now looking slightly manic. Some things get stronger when you hurt them. Some things use your attacks against you, and some things... He paused, tilting his head like he was listening to something only he could hear. Some things don't understand the difference between being shot and shooting back. As they watched, something began to emerge from the hole, not climbing out but existing outward in ways that made Velthar's eyes water. It was dark but also bright, solid but also empty, large but also small. His mind could not process what he was seeing, because what he was seeing violated the basic rules of existence. Back away slowly, Jiwan ordered. No sudden movements. No loud noises. No strong emotions. What is it? Velthar whispered. A mistake, Minji said sadly. The researchers made contact with something from outside our reality. Something that doesn't follow our rules because it exists in a place where there are no rules. The thing continued to emerge, or perhaps they were sinking into it. Velthar could not tell which. His armor was trying to protect him from damage, but how could armor stop something that attacked the concept of existence itself? Then Do-Hyun did something impossible. He walked straight toward the thing, his artificial arm extended. As he got closer, the wrongness around him got stronger. Reality bent and twisted, but instead of being destroyed or driven mad, Do-hyun just kept walking. Do-hyun, Ji-won called. Status report. Feels like Tuesday, Do-hyun replied calmly, even as the space around him folded inside out. Little bit stronger than the thing we fought on Kepler 9, but not as weird as that business on New Tokyo. Velthar watched in horror as Do-hyun reached the thing and somehow touched it with his artificial hand. There was no explosion, no energy discharge, no dramatic effect. The thing simply paused, like it was confused. Interesting, Hyunwoo said, pulling out a device that looked like a grenade but felt like a headache. It's trying to figure out how his arm works. Artificial intelligence versus impossible existence. Should be fun to watch. Can we contain it? Ji-won asked. Maybe, Minji said, taking out medical equipment that Velthar had never seen before. If we can treat the space around it like a wound, we might be able to heal the damage it's causing to reality. Velthar stared at them all. These humans were discussing an entity that violated physics like it was a routine problem. They had equipment designed for fighting impossible enemies. They spoke about previous encounters with things that should not exist. How many times have you fought creatures like this? He asked. Define like this, Hyunwoo said, setting up his strange device. If you mean things that don't follow normal rules, maybe 20 or 30 times. If you mean things that specifically attack the foundation of reality itself, maybe 5 or 6 times. If you mean things that are exactly like this one, he paused, considering. Tuesday. We fought one exactly like this on Tuesday. Different day, same cosmic horror. Velthar felt something crack inside his mind. Not breaking, but shifting. These weak-looking humans fought impossible enemies as a routine part of their job. They had developed tactics and equipment for battles that should not be possible. They discussed cosmic horrors like other soldiers discussed enemy tanks. What kind of species treated the breakdown of reality as just another day at work? The answer came to him as he watched Minji begin treating the wounded space around the entity like a patient. As he saw Do-hyun hold his ground against something that made physics cry. As he observed Hyunwoo set up weapons designed to fight concepts instead of objects, humans were not weak. They were something much worse. They were adaptable. The second world, Prosperity Deep, looked normal from orbit. The mining colony sat on the surface like a metal scar against brown rock. Ships moved in regular patterns between the planet and orbital platforms. Everything appeared to function perfectly. But Velthar's enhanced senses told a different story. The electromagnetic readings were wrong. The radio chatter from the surface sounded normal but felt hollow, like echoes of conversations rather than real communication. Even the light from the planet's sun seemed dimmer near the colony. Scans show normal population levels, Captain Ji-won reported. All mining operations are running on schedule. But look at this. She showed them the detailed readings. The colony was producing ore at exactly the same rate as 3 days ago. The same ships launched at exactly the same times. The same radio messages repeated in exactly the same pattern. It's like someone pressed a record button, Do-hyun said, his artificial arm clicking as he worked the controls. Everything is repeating perfectly. Too perfectly, Minji added. Real life has small variations. People get sick, machines break down, schedules change. This is too exact. Hyunwoo was studying his special instruments, the ones that hurt to look at directly. Something down there is very hungry, he said with his unsettling grin. And it's learned to imitate normal life to avoid scaring away its food. They landed at the main colony complex. The landing pad was clean and properly maintained. Ground crew waved them in with normal hand signals. Everything looked exactly as it should. But when Velthar stepped off the ship, his armor immediately began to itch. Not from external damage, but from internal wrongness. Like something was trying to convince his shell that it should not exist. The ground crew approached them with friendly smiles and standard greetings. But their eyes held the same emptiness as the survivors on Harmony Station. They spoke the right words in the right order, but there was no real thought behind them. "Welcome to Prosperity Deep," said a man in supervisor's clothing. "We're so glad you could visit. Would you like a tour of our mining operations?" "That would be helpful," Ji-won replied carefully. "We're here to investigate some communication problems." "Communication problems?" The supervisor's smile never changed. "We have no communication problems. All systems are functioning perfectly. Would you like a tour of our mining operations?" He said the exact same words in the exact same tone, like a recording playing back. The humans exchanged their meaningful glances again. Velthar was beginning to recognize the look. It meant they had encountered this type of wrongness before and knew what it meant. They followed the supervisor deeper into the complex. Other workers moved through the corridors with purposeful steps and empty eyes. They performed their jobs perfectly, but there was no life in their movements. Like machines pretending to be alive. The mining shafts are this way, the supervisor said, leading them to a massive elevator. We recently broke through to some very interesting geological formations. The elevator descended for what felt like forever. Velthar's enhanced hearing picked up sounds from deep below. Not the normal noise of mining equipment, but something else. Something that sounded like reality itself being slowly eaten. They emerged in a vast underground cavern that should not have existed. The rock walls curved away into impossible distances. The ceiling stretched up beyond sight even though they had only descended a few hundred meters. And in the center of the cavern was a hole. Not a normal hole. This one led down into darkness that was more than mere absence of light. It was a darkness that seemed to pull at the edges of existence itself. As Velthar looked at it, he felt parts of his consciousness trying to fall into it. Beautiful, isn't it? The supervisor said, his empty smile still perfectly in place. We broke through to it 6 days ago. It's been so generous to us. Around the edge of the hole, Velthar could see mining equipment, but the machines were wrong. They moved in patterns that followed no logical purpose. Drills that bored into empty air. Conveyor belts that carried nothing from nowhere to nowhere. Vehicles that drove in perfect circles while their drivers stared into the void. What is it? Velthar asked. The Hollow, Minji said quietly. A place that exists between real places. It feeds on the energy that holds matter together. The force that makes cause follow effect, the rules that make existence possible. And it's been here for 6 days? Longer, Hyunwoo said, setting up another of his impossible devices. Much longer? The mining operation just gave it a way to reach into our reality. Now it's learning how to copy what it consumes. As if responding to their conversation, the wrongness around them intensified. The empty workers stopped their meaningless tasks and turned toward the newcomers. Their faces still held empty smiles, but now those smiles were too wide, showing too many teeth. Welcome to Prosperity Deep, they all said in perfect unison. We're so glad you could visit. Would you like to stay forever? Velthar's warrior instincts screamed at him to fight, but fight what? These had been real people once. Now they were echoes, copies made by something that did not understand what life actually was. Back away from the hole, Ji-won ordered, slowly. Don't look directly at it. But as they retreated, the cavern began to change around them. The walls stretched and bent. The ceiling pressed down while somehow also receding into infinite distance. The elevator they had used to reach this place was no longer there, replaced by a tunnel that led in directions that did not exist. It's trying to trap us, Do-hyun said calmly, as if this was a minor inconvenience. Standard procedure for this type of entity. Isolate prey, then slowly digest them. How do we get out? Velthar asked. We don't, Hyunwoo said, his grin now looking genuinely pleased. We go in. Before Velthar could ask what that meant, Hyunwoo activated his device. It was not an explosion in any normal sense. Instead, reality around them became more real. Colors got brighter, sounds got clearer, and the wrongness that had been pressing against them suddenly recoiled. Causality anchor, Hyunwoo explained, makes local space-time remember how it's supposed to work. The Hollow hates it when things follow normal rules. Taking advantage of the moment of clarity, the team moved toward the hole, not to escape but to confront the source of the problem directly. Are you insane? Velthar demanded. You want to go into that thing? Can't fight it from out here, Minji said, readying medical equipment that looked designed to treat injuries that had not happened yet. It exists mostly in the space between spaces. We have to go to where it actually is. And how do we survive in a place where existence is optional? Very carefully, Ji-won said. She was putting on gear that Velthar had never seen before. Devices that seemed to anchor her to reality itself. And with a lot of practice. Practice? This is our 7th Hollow incursion this year, Do-hyun said matter-of-factly. We're getting pretty good at it. Velthar stared at them all. These humans talked about entering a void that could unmake existence like they were discussing a difficult but routine maintenance job. They had fought entities like this before, multiple times. They had developed equipment and tactics for battles in places where the normal laws of physics did not apply. What was worse, they seemed to be winning these battles. As they prepared to enter the hollow, Velthar realized something that made his armor plates lock up in terror. Humans did not just fight impossible enemies. They had made it their specialty. They had turned the defense of reality itself into a routine military operation. "Stay close to me," Minji said, checking her reality anchoring devices one more time. In there, the concept of distance gets confused. People can be next to each other and also miles apart at the same time. What if we get separated? Then we improvise, Yenwu said cheerfully. Humans are good at improvising. They stepped toward the edge of the hollow, and Velthar felt his sense of self begin to blur. His armor became uncertain about whether it was solid. His weapons forgot what they were supposed to do. His mind started to question whether he had ever really existed at all. But the humans just kept walking forward, their reality anchors keeping them stable in a place where stability was just a suggestion. They moved with the confidence of people who had done this before and expected to do it again. Velthar followed them into the void, and as reality dissolved around him, he began to understand what made humans truly terrifying. They did not just adapt to impossible situations, they made impossible situations adapt to them, and they did it with the casual competence of people who had turned the impossible into just another day at the office. The hollow had been feeding for eons, growing strong on the certainty that nothing could challenge it in its own domain. It was about to learn how wrong it was, because humans had come to work, and humans always finished the job. The third world, Haven's Rest, should have been impossible to reach. Their ship's navigation system kept insisting they had already arrived, while simultaneously claiming the planet did not exist. The star charts showed the system in 3 different locations at once. Even the ship's computer seemed confused about whether they were moving toward something or away from it, but Captain Jiwan navigated by looking out the window and trusting her instincts instead of the instruments. "Sometimes," she said calmly, "you have to ignore what the machines tell you and just go where you need to be." When they finally reached Haven's Rest, Velthar understood why the navigation had been confused. The planet existed in multiple states simultaneously. Sometimes it was a green agricultural world covered in farms. Sometimes it was a dead rock floating in space. Sometimes it was something else entirely, a geometric shape that hurt to perceive, made of angles that folded in on themselves. "The hollow has been here for weeks," Do-Hyun observed, his artificial arm now making different clicking sounds, as if it was adapting to the changed environment. It's had time to really change things. They could not land normally because the surface kept changing its mind about whether it was solid, liquid, or just a mathematical concept. Instead, Hyunwoo deployed what he called probability anchors, devices that convinced local reality to pick one version of itself and stick with it. When they finally touched down, they found themselves in a place that had once been the main farming settlement. The buildings were still there, but they had been rearranged according to rules that made no sense. Houses sat upside down next to barns that extended into yesterday. Roads led from here to there by way of nowhere. The people of Haven's Rest were still alive, but they had been changed by weeks of exposure to impossible geometry. They walked through walls as if doors, climbed down to reach higher places, and had conversations with their own echoes from other timelines. "Hello there," said a farmer who approached them by walking backward. "You're here about the crop reports, aren't you? We've been having excellent harvests. The corn is growing beautifully in the 3rd dimension, and our tomatoes are ripening last Tuesday." Velthar tried to understand what the man was saying, but the words seemed to rearrange themselves in his mind. The farmer looked normal except for the way he cast shadows in multiple directions and occasionally became slightly transparent. "Where is the source of the disturbance?" Jiwon asked. "Oh, that's easy," the farmer replied, pointing in a direction that was simultaneously north, down, and inside out. "The research team found it in the old mine. They were so excited about the discovery, said it would revolutionize our understanding of space and time." Minji was scanning the farmer with her medical equipment. The readings made no sense. His heart was beating in past tense, his blood was flowing uphill, and his brain waves were arriving before they were generated. "Sir," she said gently, "how long have you been like this?" "Like what?" the farmer asked, genuinely confused. "Oh, you mean the temporal displacement? That started about 3 weeks from now. But don't worry, we'll get used to it yesterday. They made their way through the twisted settlement toward the old mine. The path led them through a marketplace where vendors sold food that existed in 4 dimensions, past a school where children learned mathematics that worked backward, and around a church where the priest was delivering next Sunday's sermon to last week's congregation. Everyone they met was friendly and helpful, but wrong in ways that made Velthar's armor plates ache. They spoke about their changed reality as if it was perfectly normal. They had adapted to living in a place where cause and effect ran in circles, where up and down were suggestions rather than rules, where time moved like thick honey in multiple directions at once. How do they stand it? Velthar asked as they walked past a group of children playing a game that involved jumping between different moments in time. Humans adapt, Minji said simply. Put them in any environment, no matter how impossible, and they'll find a way to make it work. But this isn't adaptation. This is... Velthar searched for the right words. This is becoming something else entirely. Yes, Jiwan said quietly. Sometimes that's what survival requires. The mine entrance was a hole in the ground that also extended upward into the sky and sideways into alternative versions of the planet. As they approached it, Velthar could feel reality becoming increasingly negotiable. His weapons were forgetting how to fire. His armor was questioning whether it should be solid or liquid. Even his thoughts were becoming uncertain about whether they belonged to him or to someone else. The humans, however, seemed to thrive in the chaos. Do-hyun's artificial arm was now adapting in real time, changing its configuration to work with whatever version of physics was currently in effect. Hyunwoo's impossible devices were multiplying, creating copies of themselves that existed in parallel timelines. Minji was somehow treating the wounded reality around them, healing the breaks in space-time with medical procedures that should not work. And Jiwon was giving orders that made no logical sense but somehow led them exactly where they needed to go. They descended into the mine, which led both down into the planet's core and up into the concept of mining itself. The tunnels branched in directions that included maybe and never. Signs pointed toward destinations like the place where rocks dream and 3 meters southeast of purple. Deep in the mine, they found the source of all the wrongness. It was not a creature or a machine, but a presence, a hungry emptiness that had been sleeping in the spaces between spaces until the miners had accidentally broken through to its resting place. The hollow was larger here than it had been on the other worlds. It had had more time to feed, more time to grow, more time to learn how to copy and corrupt the reality around it. It filled the cavern not just with its presence but with its absence, creating spaces that were empty of existence itself. And floating in the center of the hollow, preserved in bubbles of twisted space-time, were the miners who had first made contact with it. They were still alive, still aware, but they had been changed, enhanced, evolved. They moved through the impossible space like fish swimming through water. Their minds expanded to comprehend concepts that normal human brains could not process. We tried to warn the others, one of them called out, her voice echoing from several different timelines. But how do you explain transcendence to people who still think in 3 dimensions? You don't, Jiwon replied. You show them. She began giving orders that violated everything Velthar understood about military tactics. She told Do-hyun to shoot at empty space, instructed Minji to treat the hollow itself as a patient, and ordered Hyunwoo to set up explosives in the past to prevent the present from happening. And impossibly, it worked. Do-hyun's shots at empty space hit targets that existed in potential. Minji's medical procedures began healing the tears in reality that the hollow had created. Hyunwoo's temporal explosives created a causality loop that trapped the entity in its own hunger. Velthar watched in growing horror as the humans fought an impossible battle using impossible tactics against an impossible enemy. They were not just adapting to the hollow's reality-warping presence. They were warping reality right back. How? He asked as space-time twisted around them like a living thing. How are you doing this? Practice, Jiwon said, coordinating attacks that happened in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Lots and lots of practice, but this is insane. Yes, Minji agreed, somehow performing surgery on the concept of existence itself. Insanity is very useful when fighting enemies that don't make sense. As the battle raged around them, Velthar began to understand the true nature of his human allies. They were not just soldiers. They were not just warriors. They were something else entirely. They were evolution in action, Faced with enemies that could not be fought with conventional weapons, humans had become unconventional. Confronted with threats that violated the laws of physics, humans had learned to violate physics right back. Challenged by entities that existed outside normal reality, humans had expanded their own existence to match. They were not adapting to impossible situations. They were making themselves impossible, and they were winning. The Hollow, ancient and powerful and confident in its dominion over the spaces between spaces, found itself being pushed back by creatures that refused to accept that anything was impossible. It tried to unmake them, but they unmade its unmaking. It tried to trap them in paradoxes, but they solved the paradoxes by creating new ones. For the first time in eons, the Hollow felt something it had never experienced before: fear. And watching it all, Velthar finally understood what made humans the most terrifying species in the galaxy. They did not just survive the impossible, they made the impossible possible, and then they made it routine. The heart of the Hollow was a place where existence was purely optional. Velthar found himself floating in a void that was neither dark nor light, neither empty nor full. His armor had forgotten how to be solid. His weapons had lost interest in being weapons. Even his thoughts kept dissolving before he could think them completely. But the humans moved through this impossible space like they belonged there. Their reality anchors kept them stable while everything else fell apart. They communicated using methods that did not require sound or light or any normal medium. They fought an enemy that existed everywhere and nowhere at once. "Stay close," Minji's voice came from inside his mind, though she was simultaneously standing next to him and being somewhere else entirely. "In here, distance is just a suggestion. If you get lost, follow the sound of Hyunwoo laughing. He always finds the dangerous parts first." Velthar tried to understand where they were, but the concept of where kept changing its definition. Sometimes they were in a vast cavern filled with crystalline structures that sang in colors. Sometimes they were falling through infinite space toward a destination that was also their starting point. Sometimes they were standing still while the universe rotated around them. The Hollow was all around them, but it was also inside them, and they were inside it, and none of those statements contradicted each other. It was not malicious in any way Velthar could understand. It was simply hungry, and everything that existed was food. "It's been feeding for longer than our universe has existed," Jiwan explained, her words creating ripples in space-time. "It comes from a place where there was never anything to eat, so when it found our reality, it started consuming everything it could reach." "How do we stop something like that?" Velthar asked, though his question was answered before he asked it, and he heard his own response echoing from the future. "We don't stop it," Dohyun said, his artificial arm now extending into dimensions that did not have names. "We give it something better to eat." Before Velthar could ask what that meant, he heard something that made his soul attempt to hide behind his liver. A sound that was not quite sound, coming from a direction that was not quite direction. It was the noise of something vast and ancient and impossibly powerful moving toward them, through the spaces between spaces. "Right on time," Hyunwoo said with satisfaction, his grin now visible in multiple spectrums simultaneously. "I was wondering when they'd show up." Through the chaos of the Hollow's domain came something that hurt even more to perceive than the Hollow itself. It was a ship, but also a living creature, but also a mathematical concept that had decided to become real. It moved through impossible space like a predator that had been hunting for far too long. "The determination," Jiwan said, and there was something like reverence in her voice. "Human deep space exploration vessel. Lost contact with Earth 300 years ago during an experiment with dimensional physics." "Lost?" Velthar asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Not lost," Minji corrected gently. "Evolved. They've been hunting things like the Hollow ever since they fell through the cracks in reality. They've become very good at it." The ship creature concept approached the Hollow, and Velthar felt reality itself brace for impact. But there was no explosion, no energy discharge, no dramatic confrontation. Instead, the two entities simply looked at each other across the void. And Velthar heard a conversation that took place entirely in mathematics. The Hollow was trying to communicate, but its language was hunger and consumption and the desire to reduce everything to nothing. The determination spoke in response, but its words were protection and preservation, and the absolute refusal to let anything important be destroyed. And slowly, impossibly, the Hollow began to retreat. "It's afraid," Velthar realized. Something that devours entire realities is afraid of one human ship. Not afraid, Ji-won corrected. Respectful. The determination has been hunting hollows for 3 centuries. It's developed weapons that can hurt concepts, armor that protects against non-existence, and crew members who can fight in places where fighting is impossible. What happened to the crew? They volunteered, Do-yoon said simply. When they realized what they would have to become to protect the universe from entities like this, they chose to stop being entirely human. They became something new, something designed specifically to fight impossible wars. As the hollow retreated deeper into its own domain, the determination began the process of containment. Velthar watched in awe as the ship deployed weapons that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, created barriers made of crystallized space-time, and somehow convinced the hollow to remain trapped in a prison made of its own hunger. But the process required anchors in normal reality, stable points that could maintain the connection between the hollow's domain and the universe where physics worked properly. That's us, Minji said quietly. We have to stay here, partially in this reality, partially in the normal one, keeping the door locked from both sides. Velthar felt his armor plates lock up in terror. For how long? Until we're not needed anymore, Ji-won replied. Could be years, could be centuries, could be forever. But we'll die here. Maybe, Hyunwoo said cheerfully. Or maybe we'll become something else. Something that can exist in impossible places and fight impossible enemies. Something that can protect the universe from things that want to unmake it. Velthar looked around at his human companions. They were already changing. Their edges were becoming uncertain. Their presence was spreading across multiple realities. They were voluntarily allowing themselves to be transformed into something that was no longer entirely human, and they were doing it without hesitation. Why? Velthar asked. Why sacrifice yourselves for people who will never know what you did? Because someone has to, Ji-won said simply. Because the universe is full of things that want to hurt people, and people deserve to be protected. Because we can do this job, and so we should do this job. But you're giving up your humanity, Minji smiled at him, her form now flickering between several different states of existence. No, we're expanding it. Humanity isn't about having 2 arms and breathing oxygen and living on one planet. Humanity is about protecting what matters, adapting to impossible situations, and refusing to give up no matter how bad things get. As the containment process continued, Velthar felt himself being pulled into the transformation. His armor was learning to exist in multiple dimensions. His weapons were evolving to fight conceptual enemies. His mind was expanding to comprehend threats that violated the basic rules of existence. He could have fought it. He could have demanded to be returned to normal space before the change became permanent. But as he looked at his human companions, he realized something that terrified him more than any cosmic horror ever could. He wanted to stay. He wanted to become part of this impossible mission. He wanted to help protect the universe from threats that normal soldiers could never fight. He wanted to be part of the thing that monsters feared. Welcome to the Department of Impossible Threats, Ji-won said as reality settled into its new configuration around them. Population classified. Mission: protect everything that exists from everything that shouldn't. Expected. Tour of duty, until the universe doesn't need us anymore. Velthar felt his consciousness expand across multiple realities as the transformation completed. He was still himself, but he was also something more. Something that could exist in places where existence was optional. Something that could fight enemies that attacked the foundation of reality itself. He thought about his people, safe in their empire, protected by their warrior traditions and their advanced technology. They had no idea that their universe was under constant threat from entities that could unmake entire civilizations with a thought. They did not know that their continued existence depended on volunteers who gave up their humanity to fight impossible wars. And they would never know, because that was the point. The Department of Impossible Threats worked in secret, fought battles in places that did not exist, and won victories that could never be celebrated. It was the most terrifying job in the universe. It was also the most important as Velthar settled into his new existence as something between alien warrior and cosmic guardian. He finally understood what made humans truly fearsome. It was not their technology or their tactics or their adaptability. It was their willingness to become whatever the universe needed them to be, even if what the universe needed was monsters. Monsters that protected instead of destroyed. Monsters that saved instead of consumed. Monsters that loved their prey enough to become unlovable themselves. In his final report, transmitted to the Thexari Empire through channels that existed outside normal spacetime, Velthar wrote, "I have learned what true fear looks like. It does not look like cosmic horrors or impossible enemies or the breakdown of reality itself. True fear looks like watching people you care about voluntarily sacrifice their humanity to protect strangers they will never meet. True fear is realizing that the universe's greatest defense against the impossible is a species that makes the impossible possible. True fear is understanding that humans do not just fight monsters. When necessary, they become monsters. And they do it with a smile and a joke and the absolute certainty that someone has to do the job."